Good evening. Welcome to week 6 of Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University. So your papers and presentations are due now, tonight, yesterday, depending on when you're watching this. So I haven't gotten too many questions on them. And it's Sunday now, so I'm looking forward to grading them, marking them, and having them back to you by next week. So again, groups 1, 2, and 3, you'll be doing your presentation, or first groups, and then the rest of the groups will be doing paper, and then we'll be flipping that around for the final week. So week 5 review. So a couple of issues that come up. When does radicalization get monitored further? You saw in the case studies, whether the European Union or Fort Hood, people were on the radar of law enforcement. But there was not enough to arrest or detain. So when does radicalization, when do we look into further scrutiny? When you are watching ISIS-related videos on the internet passively, when you're actively liking those videos or Facebook pages, when you're communicating via Twitter, chat, email with known operatives, and then when some of that information gets a little bit more threatening. So you have to tell me, when does radicalization get further monitored? Do we have the capacity to monitor everyone that starts going down the road? What do we do if they are going down the road of radicalization? Again, going from passive information viewing to more active viewpoints. And then you have to also ask, do we the same for radical right-wing extremists? You know, we have procedures if you're associated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but we have a whole plethora of right-wing groups that have conducted terrorist attacks, arguably, and have operate quite freely on the internet, operate quite freely in the actual space. So again, when do they get monitored further? And then what do we do for people on the radar? One of the problems that we have continuing, and this is not just for the radical Islamic, but the right-wing extremists, several of the people, I'll just take the Capitol Hill January 6th insurrection, were on the radar of law enforcement. Some of them were already known to law enforcement. You know, the QAnon guy with the horns and the funny painting and stuff? Yeah, he was known to law enforcement multiple times. He was on the radar of law enforcement. Others have been who were there on January 6th were on the radar of law enforcement. But nothing could have been done beforehand because they didn't commit a crime or do enough to be committed for mental health evaluation. So, what do we do for the people who are on the radar of law enforcement? How do we solve that problem? And again, it's the gap between what we know we were on the radar of law enforcement, but not enough to detain or arrest. Do we have the appropriate funding structures and people? Do we need to change our laws? Do we need to be more aggressive? But then, when do we get too aggressive, where we're now like the People's Republic of China, where we're monitoring everyone using facial recognition and artificial intelligence? Do we need more funding? And again, we've spent lots of money on this, so if you're going to ask for more funding, yeah, you better have your ducks in a row. And then finally, should we just accept this? Lone wolves. We live in a free society, at least in the United States, that allows people to travel, allows people to access guns quite readily. Should we just accept that we're going to have low-level terrorism, low-level gun violence, school shooters, and this is just a factor in our country? Again, I'll let you decide on that. So as we go from the terrorism to criminal intelligence, we're going to look at the Lemieux article, and then you're going to make the assessment on CompStat, which was not a computer program, but a method of accountability for local law enforcement. And many have argued that this led to the decline in crime that we saw from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But I want you to ask, what led to the decline in crime? Certainly people who are proponents of CompStat and proponents of criminal intelligence and better policing have said the decline in crime is because of better law enforcement. Is that true? Are there other factors? Demographics, better economy, a civilizing process, for lack of a better term, amongst where we realize that crime doesn't pay. So what has led to that massive decline in crime that we saw, and what if you want to look at this from a social science perspective, we had a decline, and then we saw an uptick since about 2020. Why have we seen the uptick? What were those factors that led to the decline in crime removed, and we only saw an uptick? So think of that as a kind of a social scientist. And then law enforcement technologies. We're going to look at Boston Marathon documentary, but as you're going through those technologies, ask, could they be used in non-high profile cases? The documentary covers Boston. There's been a lot written on use of artificial intelligence and facial recognition regarding the January 6th riot. However, can they be used to deal with normal day-to-day crime, not these high-profile cases? So that's the question I want you to go through your head as you're going through some of these documentaries. So I'll have your papers graded by next week. If there's questions or issues, let me know.